A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, every high priest is taken from among men and made the representative before God to offer gifts and sacrifice for sins. He is able to deal patiently with the ignorant and erring, for he himself is beset by weakness, and so, for this reason, must make sin offerings for himself as well as for the people. No one takes this honor upon himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, it was not Christ who glorified himself in becoming high priest, but rather the one who said to him, "You are my son. This day I have begotten you," just as he says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." The word of the Lord.
Our second reading for this Sunday comes from the letter to the Hebrews. We have been reflecting on the compassion of God that we must receive in faith. Now, in the first reading, we saw how Jeremiah the prophet envisions the return of Ephraim to their home. And this is out of God's compassion. The God who calls himself Father and who will treat Ephraim as his firstborn. And so they will be guided, they will be restored, and they will be consoled. Now, in the second reading, we find a depiction of the high priests who offer sacrifices to God on behalf of the people. The ordinary high priest is a sinner, beset by weakness. And so, the high priest offers sacrifices to God, ritual sacrifices, not only for the sins of the people, but also for his own sins. But now, we have someone greater than just any high priest, our real high priest, Jesus Christ, who is our representative before God in an eternal way because he is risen from the dead. And so he stands before God for us eternally. He will continue to be our representative before God. Now, we can ask the question, how can Jesus be our representative before God? How can he represent us? I'm sure many of you have heard the efforts of like our COMELEC, the Commission on Elections, to purify the party list system because some groups claim to be representatives of poor sectors, but in fact, upon investigation, they cannot and they fail to represent these groups. No? So representing a group is not just a matter of enlisting myself. You look for some characteristics to qualify a person as a real representative. Now, Jesus Christ, how can he represent us? Isn't he the eternal Son of God? What does he know about us to be his representative? Here the second reading tells us that he can be our representative because, yes, as Son of God, he became one of us. He became incarnate. Just like any high priest, he was beset by our human weakness. He was tempted in every way that we are tempted. Because out of love, he assumed our condition. This is the compassion of Jesus the high priest. He does not know conceptually what we go through as human beings. He experienced our condition by being one of us. So Jesus' compassion, sharing our temptations and our weaknesses without falling into sin, made him a compassionate high priest, not a harsh judge. And because he is such a compassionate high priest, he can intercede for us to the Father, with the Father. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, I mean to ask you, are you aware and do you celebrate? No? Are you aware of the many times Jesus has exercised His compassionate love towards us? Do we celebrate those moments? Today, we are asked to recall the many times Jesus was our compassionate high priest.